Welcome to the Free Cities podcast. My name is Timothy Allen, and this is the official podcast of the Free Cities Foundation. Hello, and welcome to episode number 94 of the Free Cities podcast. Well, I've got a pretty interesting one for you today. A few weeks ago, I was lucky enough to sit down with Shajay Bhooshan, who runs the Computation and Design Group at Zaha Hadid Architects. Now, if you don't know who Zaha Hadid are, you better quickly look them up and take a look through their extensive worldwide portfolio. You won't be disappointed, I can assure you that. Anyway, the reason I wanted to speak to Shajay, well, apart from the fact that he's a hugely interesting guy working in an even more hugely interesting and fascinating field, he also worked on the designs for some pretty well-known free cities projects, Próspera being one, Praxis, and Liberland's metaverse project. Anyway, listen on for more information on all those projects. Zaha Hadid definitely, in my opinion, work at the sharp edge of the wedge as far as using innovative technology goes. And speaking to Shajay, I got a peek into the future of architectural design and city planning, along with digital fabrication of virtual places in the metaverse. Spoiler alert, and this was a surprise to me, Shajay predicts that one day they will generate more revenue from the digital realm than from the physical world. We'll have to see about that. Anyway, a great conversation. As you probably know, I'm a bit of a traditionalist when it comes to architecture, but this conversation really softened up my opinions on the future of building and design. Don't forget podcast at free-cities.org for comments and questions. Our yearly Free Cities get-together in Prague. Tickets can be found at libertyinourlifetime.org. That's an unmissable event in my opinion. Big enough to be exciting, but small enough that you could probably get to meet everyone you would want to over the weekend if you try hard enough. Plenty of evening socials and daytime mixers to help you meet and plan. See you there, of course, I'll be there. And now, without further ado, I would implore you to please just sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Shajay Bhooshan. I'll tell you what then, before we get into that, can you just introduce yourself and exactly what it is? We're at the Zaha Hadid offices here in London, wonderful place. Yeah. I know you work here, but it is, it's an unusual, I would say you have an unusual job. Right? Maybe you could explain.
My name is Shajay and I work for Zaha Hadid Architects, where I've been working for the last 17 years. I run the research group called Computation and Design Group. And the mandate of the group is working at the intersection of design technologies and construction technologies. And so in that sense, we look 3 to 5 years into the future, we're try to bring these technologies, rehearse them on practice projects or experimental projects, and then some of them make their way into actual practice. So it's a technology group per se, but technologies of design and construction.
And your connection, the reason I'm speaking to you is because you were involved with Próspera's designs, with Liberland's designs, with Praxis.
Yes.
Right.
So we, as part of our close engagement with Patrick Schumacher, who I've known since the time he basically hired me all those years ago, and we have closely aligned with like his intellectual framework for computational design called parametricism, which is basically use of computers for tackling design tasks, right? Like whether it's at the furniture scale or building scale or city scale. So it's and it also has a unique aesthetic outcome, like which part of it is associated with Zaha Hadid architects, but it's not only about ZHA, but it's more broadly about the use of computers to solve complex problems which are beyond the capacities of individual architects. So it's a tool of collaboration and exploration. Yeah.
Presumably, I'm not an expert by any means in architecture at all, but computers and architecture have gone together for quite a while, have they not? I mean, design was one of them. Is a great application of the computer. Right?
Yeah.
So what's the difference?
Actually, like it's a very interesting history of computer-aided design. Like it started along the same time as computer-aided like movie making, like computer graphics per se, like Pixar and so on. And even the early days of AI, like somewhat coincide with computer-aided design. Like, but strangely enough, like after being like shoulder to shoulder with all these emerging professions in the 1960s to 80s, like architecture somehow, for whatever reason, like made a pause and returned back to a non-technological base, like for 20 years. And again, over the millennium years, like at the turn of the century, like London became the hub for computational design with Foster and Partners, Grimshaw, and so on, like, and all the Millennium projects, like the Millennium Bridge, like the Gherkin, and so on. And then like we picked that momentum up when we started engaging with China, right? Like, and because they build so much so quickly, like the only way we can deal with that kind of complexity at that scale is through leveraging computational processes and being digitally native, as we like to call it. Like, so we don't like kind of sketch it by hand and then use a computer. All our thought processes are innately linked to how we might be able to execute it on a computer. So
something that just instantly sprung to mind when you mentioned that the use of computers has kind of receded or went through a phase of receding. Is that anything to do with bureaucracy and turning off people from trying to innovate? Because I know from speaking to Patrick that the bureaucratic and legislative, world of especially Europe is pretty anti-architecture, I would guess. Is that right?
I think. Partly it is bureaucratic, partly because also there's, when there is not a real reason, where there's not a good alignment with the tool and the demand for it. Like, for example, if towards the 80s, like, the UK started not building anything, like, and so when you're not building at scale, like, and you have all these bureaucratic processes that prevent any building, then there's further lack of appetite for using novel processes. Because
why did it stop in the 80s though? Sorry to butt in. Like, why did the UK stop building in the 80s? That was like a boom time, wasn't it? I mean, like financially.
Yeah, exactly. But it started picking up again, I think, like, Canary Wharf and so towards the 90s. And that's why, like, the Millennium projects, like, again re-engage with like computational design, like, we were not by any means like the only people doing it, like, and the early pioneers were in fact Foster and Partners, and like in the UK had like quite a strong base in this, and it still continues to do so. Like, London is still quite a hub for all the computational engineers, like, and consultants are also very digitally savvy. And so I think it's the scale of building, like something like Canary Wharf that was built over 15 years or so, and the coordination, the London Olympics, like, so all of this really needed like a digital layer or to be digitally intrinsic, like to coordinate and develop. And so I think, so maybe that's a good relation to why we are interested in computational processes and the history of urbanization. because the world needs cities, and by 2050 there's another 2.5 billion more people expected to be in cities. So we see that there is intrinsic connection between designing at scale and cities as engines of prosperity.
My observation of what you're doing, like I say, it's relatively primitive. So correct me if I'm wrong, but when I look at, buildings in general, periods, what you guys are doing now is completely new. Actually, hold on a second. Is that true? Like, if you go way back, people use natural form a lot more. But the design of certainly residential buildings has been relatively similar for a long time.
Sure.
Roofs like that or like that. So pointed roofs or flat roofs.
Sure.
Square buildings. You do see round buildings.
Yeah.
Not as much, but but what you seem to be designing with computers is the kind of what we expect to see on Star Trek and and somewhere in the last frontier or the next frontier.
Yeah, I would say that there is, residential buildings, even though they might make up up to 50% or sometimes even more of cities, they have relatively been the same for a long time. And also, the previous generation, through the Renaissance and so on, innovation in the building industry percolated down from building churches, building these public buildings, even the palaces, or very rich people's houses, where the source of innovation, the built environment doesn't have a history of venture capital funded growth or innovation. There was a short history of state funded, innovation in the built environment, but in the 20th century. But by and large, it is through building these public buildings for centuries at a time, like the churches and the business and I don't know, they call the warehouses and so on,
industrial.
And those technologies, when you discover them through these buildings, make their way down into the everyday buildings, which includes residential buildings, and it could also include shops and so on. And that's been the model for innovation in the built-in environment for a long time. And so when you stop building secular public buildings with a civic pride, then you're kind of killing off innovation in the built environment, because which you can see now, everybody talks about building houses, the dearth of houses, but to innovate on house building, you actually need to generally innovate on larger public buildings, and which is why we think our buildings are so promotional of technologies, because we only work on public projects for the large part, like stadiums and museums and so on. And our projects, they do fund innovation in the sense that money flows through the client, through our company, into our consultants, and also directly from the client to all the fabricators and so on. So a typical public building could actually fund a lot of innovation, and architects have a lot they can do even though we don't control most of the money, but we could actually influence the process quite a lot. And Zaha and Patrick kind of realized that very early on, and so a lot of engineers, a lot of digital fabricators and technology companies actually want to be associated with ZHA because of that, right? Because we are kind of we're at the hub of capital flow, let's say, in the built environment. Yeah.
Okay, then before we talk about, because it leads quite easily into Próspera, but I don't want to talk about that just yet. I want to get to the heart of what these new design processes are. Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing, I did a little bit of reading, but not too much, that you're incorporating the traditional structures of buildings, let's say, like the physics of it, arches that hold things together, like these lintels that mean that you can put weight on this and all this kind of stuff. But you're using a computer to push it to an area that you couldn't compute yourself.
Yes.
Is that right? And what you
right.
end up with are very ergonomic looking, strangely familiar but unfamiliar buildings that hold themselves together. So that might be a sort of, I'm looking at that picture on the wall there. It's like a toric shape, but somehow probably in real life it holds itself together if you build it correctly. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And it's also a tradition that's existed in architecture for a long time, right? And particularly became formalized and systematized, through the early Gothic periods and I mean in Western architecture and canonized by the time it got to Renaissance and so on. And so we are connecting up with that tradition through the use of computers, as you rightly point out. And there is also, first of all, pre-computer precedent, like people like Antonio Gaudi, who built the Sagrada Familia, and this is pre-computer, but it was already computational because the way he calculated the structural stability of these stone churches and buildings was using a graphical method called graphic statics or graphical structures, and we are picking up that kind of strand as well, by our collaboration with ETH in Zurich, particularly Professor Philipp Bloch, who's taken that graphical means of designing, because it's graphical, it was also very intuitive for designers to work with. It's not numerical like many other calculations were in. And so we're picking up that tradition and making it very congenial to our architecture. And also, upgrading it through imposing other constraints, not only structural, because buildings have to do a whole lot more other than just stand up, particularly the user experience of how 21st century people use spaces is not the same way as going to church a few hundred years ago. And so complex, buildings become more and more complex, but we still have to adhere to, or it's beneficial to adhere to the founding principles of structure, of construction, and then similarly of environmental prudence, aligning your building in accordance to the solar exposures and all of these traditional, let's say, principles don't go away. I mean, so, but we can augment all of these and do more calculations with the use of computers, explore more options, right? That's our core principle of design, that we don't leave it to the genius of an individual designer. We iterate through it, and the computer helps us iterate a whole lot more options than we would otherwise been able to do.
How do we know that these kind of buildings are going to be conducive for humans? Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? I'll tell you why I asked that question, because I looked through the images, the computer generated images of Próspera, and I think the last one was a lady holding a baby in an apartment with sort of curved walls and all this kind of stuff. And I was looking at that thinking, my square furniture is not going to look very good in that room. Simple things like that, which is when you change a paradigm. It's like if you move into a lighthouse, none of your furniture fits anymore. You've got to get into lighthouse furniture, which is round things and curved things, and is it a case that you believe that this kind of this kind of architecture is the future, maybe the long deep future?
Yeah.
Or is this going to be like a period? Or
I do think it's. I mean, maybe the kind of specific language of architecture will evolve and continue to evolve, and as it must, because the requirements change and the technology of construction change. So so there's the churches look the way they do because of the material they use, right? Or most even residential buildings, they look the way they do because of the size of brick, and the room sizes are related to the size of the brick. and even the lintel that you mentioned are related to things that can be lifted or produced. So construction becomes quickly formalized into a set of congenial heuristics, let's say, like between construction and structural constraints and also transportation and all of these things, and so. But like when you start innovating, like you don't, like that's why you need a very big building where it provides you in enough impetus to start changing the paradigm, because like it's very difficult to change houses because unless you build like something that is helps make the change in paradigm, right? And so I do think like this kind of rule-based architecture that adheres to or addresses constraints of structure, manufacturing, environment, increasingly all the carbon agenda and discussions, all of these become more and more complex, and the only way you can deal with it, in addition to how people use spaces, like increasingly every space has to be dual use at least, right? Like because of work from home or whatever, like the way we use buildings and cities are changing. So there are physical constraints, and then there's the social aspects, and the way we use buildings change. So I think this rule-based way, use of computers, like is going to stay, and increasingly, like as society becomes digitally native, like there's no way that architecture can stay at the sidelines, because if we do stay on the sidelines, somebody else will use a computer, and it might not be called architecture, but
at the point, as an example, right, at the point where you see that start this kind of computer generated architecture scaling down to the home, and because like I personally I've built one house, like from scratch. And when I think about that process, the simple lessons that I learned from a timber frame building are very decentralized. I could do it. I could go to the local hardware shop. I could buy the wood. I could buy the bricks. I could do a few calculations on a bit of paper and know what my load bearing is and all this kind of stuff. And I can build a house, right? So in the future, if we're talking about like 3D printed shapes, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff, are we less empowered as individuals at that point? Like I could, because really where I live now, if I could dig the stone up myself and cut the trees down, I could build a house. Once I start using all this kind of stuff, where does that leave me? I have to rely on a 3D printer at that point, or not? I mean, it's just a thought experiment. Yeah.
Yes, I think you might have to. I mean, rely on machines like we rely on machines for everything else. Like like we no longer only rely on our human brain. Like we are augmented through the use of phones and the internet and the computer and so on. So yeah, I mean, the good version of the future is that, individual liberties to build houses still remain. We're just augmented through the use of appropriately small-sized machines. Like, so there's no reason why a 3D printer needs to be gigantic, right? Like, but initially it needs to be because, like, that's the scale at which innovation can be funded, and so. But once it takes off, once a new paradigm takes off, like there will be smaller machines that we could help repair things. You could, and the other benefit of a digitized process is it enables a long-term planning, right? You can foresee that your plumbing might need to be dug up again, so you can phase your plumbing. Like it's no longer about intuition or learned heuristics, like which I guess you have some experience in construction, like so you said you could do these back of paper calculations. So these kind of rule of thumb or heuristics have been handed down over time. And through the use of computers, you can now expand on those rules, like, and discover that like you can change the wall by like another 2 feet, and you might save down the line, like, a whole lot of trouble. So digitalization is a key instrument, like, to achieve all kinds of constraints and all kinds of goals, like including sustainability goals, material savings, worker safety, and also exploration of like new kinds of arrangements of spaces to deal with, working from home. For example, if you have to, like, the computer could help you design something that you're not familiar with. And
presumably, now I've started thinking about it, it's making more sense. In the future, if I have a 3D printer of sorts in my community or at my house even, I can just download a new house and instructions. And so I am still empowered to build my own house, in fact.
That's right. And yeah, actually, where I teach at the same course that Patrick co-founded like many years ago, 20 plus years ago, we continue to explore this topic of, digital fabrication and community building at the same time. Like local community formation is also intrinsically tied to making stuff together, right? Like, or being reliant on somebody in the community in some sense. And when we started exploring this topic of digital fabrication and having micro factories or little factories in the community, we then started realizing that actually the community could be in London, but somebody in India could help you. And because it's a digitalized process, and so it's a kind of local, global, kind of instantaneous dual scale. And that also means that, people in India could invest in your community, like, or you could invest in a community in India. And so it does make, like, shrink the world, like, and make it knowledge more widely transmittable. And materials, of course, they have like a natural, traditional congeniality with the location and so on. But even that, like, it can increasingly change when you use 3D printing. The material is transported in one way and then you form it in another way. So,
and what you're actually describing is what is actually happening in real life now in Próspera. Is that right? They have Próspera has been designed around. They have a robotic factory there, printing things. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what you know about? Well, first, tell me how you were involved in Próspera first. Let's start there.
Yeah. Actually, so Titus Gable, like, at that time, I think like the Free Cities Foundation was not formed, but he was thinking about this. And then Titus knows Patrick for a long time. I don't know how they met. And Titus and Eric came to Zaha Hadid Architects, like, to meet Patrick around 2019. And then already they were thinking about making this free private city in Honduras, like, because of like the history of the Honduran support of free private cities. But anyway, so Eric and Titus came and they met Patrick and they wanted us to do a kind of master plan vision, like how the city might grow from one small community of 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 and so on. So we made that study, and then they went away, like they did, to raise funds and so on. And in the meantime, like I continued to be in touch with Eric, and we were exploring this topic of digital fabrication and community building. Like all our projects in the school were about like London, like but the idea resonated with Eric like quite a lot, like, and so we started rethinking the master plan vision project, like from the ground up. We said, like, can we start thinking about residential communities first? At that time, he wanted to make a village for pioneers to come to Próspera and like, set up factories or set up startups and so on. So we designed like a set of houses which can be customized. And the idea was that you can configure them online on the browser. And then not only configure your own house, but you can also invite your neighbors to come and decide to share some amenities together, or you know your neighbors kind of. So you kind of configure the community online before you transfer it on land. And so that way you can test this community building on many different sites at the same time, because there's no actual cost other than just hosting it. And so that was the idea that got us started, and we built like designed a set of kit of parts, like so you can configure these houses like a kit of Lego, and making design easy enough for non-designers to be able to do it. So it involved a lot of work for us to design for more than one building, because you have to design for all kinds of possible combinations, which are also then need to be structurally realized, physically realized. So there was a lot of rule-based thinking involved to enable this kind of user choice. And so that was the most interesting aspect that we discovered, that like parametric design actually could be highly integrally connected to user choice, like customizable, not only interiors but also exteriors. And so later we also, as part of this, was the microfactory idea that like we can build these houses, modular houses, on an island, and a small number of them, using a microfactory rather than a gigafactory, right? Usually modular construction requires a gigafactory, and you invest about 150 million, and then you have to build thousands of houses. You cannot build 10, and you also cannot customize thousands of houses the way you can customize 10. And so Eric then invested in this microfactory, and they built. I mean, we only suggested that they can make this microfactory, and so they built it. Now it's functional. We hope that like once there's demand for these houses that we designed as Hadid architects, that they will be physically realized as well. Yeah.
Do you know what's being printed at the factory at the moment? I mean, I saw a video of it the other day with the robotic arms and.
Mm-hmm. Actually, it's not 3D printing. That's another interesting aspect of microfactories, is that it's just a kind of a shed with like a robot in it, right? Like one or more robots and one or more digital machines. And what's interesting is because it's a robot, it's more agile than a fixed machine. So this factory has been configured to process timber. And the designs of the houses also acknowledge that it will be made of local Honduran timber, and the sizes are also configured to the microfactory. It's not like something like the panels can be lifted by humans, a few humans together, like minimizing the requirement for very big cranes. So it, like the designs had to be adhering to a lot of these constraints, that it can be produced in a microfactory. And so this microfactory is currently configured to process timber, but like it can also do 3D printing of concrete because of its innate integration of industrial robots.
That's interesting. Yeah. So your designs incorporate timber in Próspera. Mm-hmm. How, just out of interest, I mean, you know, I'm into computers. Mm-hmm. How do you design a program that takes all that into account? What are you doing? Is it an algorithm that just has hundreds of different parameters? And
actually, that's an interesting question, and it leads to a nuance that is usually missed. You know, just because we use computers doesn't mean that we are doing something that is opaque to a human designer, right? So particularly like the way we do it is we rely on geometric intuition, right? Like the rules that I mentioned that Gaudi himself had used, and before him many others. Gaudi only made it super famous through the church, and Professor Philippe Bloch I mentioned, has upgraded all of this historic knowledge and made it available to computer extension. So what this means is that like we think about what kind of shapes, like arches and walls and so on, which are aligned with the material properties. Like so, Stone, if you think about it, like is very good in compression. You cannot, it's not very good in tension. So that's why it's very good in arches and walls and so on, because it compresses the material in that particular shape. And similarly for timber, it's also very good in compression, but it also has tensile capacities, and you don't want to bend it. And so it's all boils down to designing the right geometry, the right shape for the material. And then we also think about the constraints of size, like, the robot can reach a certain distance, and so we already know how much time it's going to take a robot to process X amount of material, and so we can incorporate some of those constraints as geometric constraints. So we say the length of a member should not be more than 2.5 meters, or so we can use the computer to negotiate all these constraints. So if the structure says the angle should not be greater than 30 degrees, and if the material constraints or fabrication constraints say it shouldn't be more than 3 meters, then all of these negotiations you can input into a computer and reach a kind of optimum. But all of it is very geometrically intuitive. So, and that's why we are very much fascinated by pre-computer technologies, because it was very transparent to a human designer, and you can inspect that model, even though the computer does the work. If it doesn't look right, you can actually bring your human intuition to bear, and so that's
You think that as humans we have this innate understanding of the visual and the how can I put it, the structurally sound, let's say, or something like.
I mean, to some extent, yes. Because we are embodied beings, so we naturally understand physics through our bodies, right? So we know that if we raise our arms and put it on our sides, it's gonna hurt our arm. So that's a principle of cantilever. And so we also know if you do a plank, it's gonna hurt on. Whereas if you arch your back, it's gonna hurt less. And so it's there is a natural intuition to some extent, and of course all of this intuition has to be formalized and can be extended through theorems and other rules. But yeah.
One of my bugbears with very futuristic looking buildings, and obviously I'm probably missing the point here, because at one point all buildings probably looked futuristic but somehow I intuit that these kind of buildings really do look very different from the last iteration. We're not talking about Victorian to Georgian to whatever, new, whatever. Mm-hmm. One of my bugbears with them is they don't age very well.
Sure.
And I'm looking at brutalist architecture here, which is one of my pet hates in the world of. But when you create a very straight line, or in the case of your sort of toric shapes, when you create these things, what I like about traditionally built buildings with stone and timber and slate roofs and stuff is when they get older, when they get a patina on them, when they get things growing up the side of them, somehow to me they look aesthetically pleasing, whereas what I find with very minimalist and slick buildings is they don't. They look dirty, or they look unkempt, or they look. Is it? What am I onto something there? Is that true or not? What do you think?
I mean, a large part of that could be explained by evolutionary processes, right? That all the ugly buildings of the past have not survived, and so the ones that have survived are the ones that have aged well, and so on. So, and I think now maybe 25 years into this, let's say, new paradigm, using new construction industrial processes and digital design processes and so on. It is beginning to mature. I admit, the first wave of projects, they can innovate on certain dimensions, and they couldn't dedicate enough resources to think about longevity and so on. But increasingly, as the skill of the professionals involved, the architecture, engineering, construction, they all get digitalized, and there's a craft involved that gets mature. Like we can see the later stages of buildings now appearing in the last 10 years. Like I think they will age a whole lot better, and it doesn't mean that we have reached the pinnacle of like this paradigm, but we are only, let's say, 25 years in. So there's 75 years left in this century. So I have no doubt that we will grow rapidly in the longevity aspect, particularly because now there is a lot of social incentive, like with decarbonization and sustainability taking a rightful forefront of public discourse, and so there is opportunity to innovate there as well, like because for the first 20 years, like most of the effort has been on digitalizing, like, and exploring possibilities of new shapes and making it attractive enough and bold enough so that people can buy in. But now, as a collaborative and cumulative effort, we will definitely achieve the next generation of buildings, which will last longer, which will age better.
I mean, that's been my observation architecturally of my lifetime, is that high time preference has been the zeitgeist of recent times.
Yes.
And as a result, you get terribly built buildings. And it's still happening now because I live on a farm that's 450 years old.
Right.
And it's absolutely fine. It's thick walls, big oak beams everywhere. It's not to everyone's taste, but we love it. And in my local village recently, they built some houses, a group of houses, and I watched them go up in about a month and a half.
Yeah.
Steel, very thin looking steel framework, then not much over the top, some wood, and having built a house as well, and knowing that I over-engineered it, because that's just my brain works like that. I want it to last another 500 years. If we build an extension, I want it to last 500 years.
Sure.
But somehow we live in this paradigm of, people having a very high time preference. They don't think 100 years in the future. And in fact, it's almost part of the business model to replace things in the short term.
Yeah, I think, yes. So it's an interesting tension between, counterpoint to this is, cities like Tokyo, like where they have a 30-year life cycle of buildings. And that means that, they can adapt. One of the reasons the building regulations in Tokyo require you to tear it down in 30 years is because of the earthquakes.
Is that right? I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Is that what the law is? You have to change your building every 30 years.
Yes, and they have a long tradition of timber buildings designed for dismantling and repair for similar reasons, because earthquakes could destroy everything or new material technologies become available. And so, it used to be the case that like buildings adapt and change over time. But as a consequence, the outward because people are not investing enough pride into the buildings themselves, like the Tokyo architecture is not that great, right? Like the human experience of the city is not architectural. It's more how close the buildings are, the streets and like the shops and so on, which is amazing. So there is that trial and error process, like how to make the highest and best use of land as a resource and other material resources. Like, if we make a house and it remains a house for a long time, like we might not know whether that's the best use of the land. So cities have to have this trial and error process. Of course, there's also the social angle that people want many generations to grow into the house and so on. So that's where there is like this tension between parts of the city that needs to have stability and other parts of the city that needs to have change. And so the city block paradigm, like, where there is like medium density or gentle density as it's called now, like where it's a multimodal use. So it could be residence today, but it also could be a workshop and lightweight industry. So we do need like innovation at the new city block design, the live work or the top shop model that London also had. But like no longer adhere to the old shops, but the new industrial age and industry 4.0 or lightweight industry or biotech industry. And so we can have all of these changes in the built environment that support like rapid innovation and trial and error, because there's no other way to evolve cities. You cannot plan it once and like just say this is residence and it's fixed forever, because like, you know, like things like COVID might happen, and you know, entire Canary Wharf, which was fantastically working and it was extremely high performance for fintech industry, but no longer suited because, and so these kind of things happen all the time, right? So
what was your time horizon for Próspera then in the designs there?
So that's where it, so we designed the houses like that it can grow little by little, right? Like that's where the microfactory idea is. The first source of point of departure, so to speak, was not to design the entire master plan in one go and think of thousands of houses, like just start in chunks of 25. So if you can build 25 and then grow, and so you're not going to make massive mistakes in the utilization of land. So if you could make, you know, half an acre at a time, like, and that might or might not be the best use of land for that period of time, but then you can either dismantle it because it's all timber and like it's designed for taking it apart as much as possible. But also it's more meant for incremental growth. And that I think is a key point of departure or the source of innovation, where we can grow a master plan rather than like design it top down and build eventually. A lot of the cities are also designed right now top down, right? Because all the financial instruments are based on having 100,000 inhabitants or 300,000 inhabitants and X number of flats, and that leads to a lot of ghost towns for sure.
Presumably as well.
Yeah.
It would be hard to design something that didn't have an end point. Sorry, it would be hard to get that given the green light in a place like London.
Sure.
Because they need to know what your end point is, presumably. You can't say, well, we've got this idea, we'd like to start like this, and then let's just see where it goes.
Yeah, that's true. And the planning regulations are so stringent that like the end point needs to already speculate that, you know, there will be X number of flats, 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom, and, you know, within quotes, affordable and so on. So there is hardly any freedom for, you know, kind of trial and error process, which like cities absolutely need.
Do you know what the current stage of development of these buildings are in Próspera?
So, we are designed these houses in so-called RIBA stages, right? Like RIBA 1 is like just conceptual design, RIBA 2 is like a bit more design, and RIBA 3 is like more schematic, and we know exactly the sizes of rooms and everything. And stage 4 is things are costed. So we're the first pilot set of 7 houses and a medical spa. They're not cheap or affordable, but they will subsidize innovation for the next set of houses that will be a lot cheaper. So the pilot buildings of 7 houses and the medical spa, which is basically another 4 houses converted into a medical facility, is designed to stage 4. So it's available to be purchased, and if somebody purchases it, either an investor or individual buyers, then they can be manufactured on site and assembled within a year.
When you say unaffordable, Can you, if you've got any idea, like what does a house cost? Like what are they? How many bedrooms are they?
They're vary from 2 bedrooms to 3 bedrooms, and so it's a kind of semi-apartment, right? Like so they're clusters of 3 apartments at a time, and they're not like just stacked on top. Some are double height, like vertical. Some are horizontal.
These are the ones that have these kind of sweeping lines.
Yes,
the ones in the photographs.
Yes, they've evolved a bit from that, but yeah, more or less in that sense, yeah.
And do you know how much they were going to cost, or does anyone know how much? Or you don't have to say if you don't want to.
Yeah, we do. We have costed it on island, and so per square meter they will I don't know, like they will retail at maybe $7,500 a square meter. And
I don't know what that means. Let me think about that. I know how much a house costs. I don't know how much a square meter. What is it? What's the average price in central London, say, per square meter?
Oh, yeah, central London is 10,000, 13,000 pounds a square meter.
And you're talking half that.
Yeah, so we are starting at the high end, right? Like,
yes,
so,
of course.
So it is cheaper than the high end in London, of course, but like it's the same design.
Yeah.
We have put the same amount of design effort. Anywhere else, it would cost more. And the reason it costs less is because like we have designed it for using this micro factory on the one hand, and the factory is already there on island. Yeah. And the other reason it's going to be cheaper is because like we can economize using these pre-designed processes, right? Like we're not designing it and then hoping to sell it. Like, so we use this configurator originally, like, and 13 or 14 buyers actually configured their houses and their neighbor. So the current set of houses have that input from potential buyers, and the reason those original buyers are no longer not yet buying is because in the interim, like there were changes in the government and so on.
It's a shame, obviously. A lot of the project as a whole is still striving ahead, but it's obviously scaring off people at the moment.
Yes, that's true.
Makes sense. Can I ask you about the configurator? Mm-hmm. Is that a native configurator to Zaha Hadid, or is that something you created just for Próspera?
Well, so the research and ideas for that have been ongoing in the school where Patrick co-founded, and so. In 2002, there was a team called RAM TV, and their master's thesis, let's say, project was a team-based project, and one of them actually is a director now at Zaha Hadid Architects called Manuela. Their project was proposed this kind of configurator, and Patrick wrote a book as well called Negotiate My Boundary. And so their project was based in London, and the use of configurators to configure online communities, and then use prefabrication to build, physically realize them. And Patrick wrote an article called the Autopoiesis of Residential Communities. And so in 2016, when my wife and I started this new agenda for our studio in the course, we picked up on those ideas from 2002 and tried to make it congenial with or explore it using new technologies of robotic fabrication on the one hand, but also game software like Fortnite and all of these things on the other. So we've been exploring those ideas for a long time and very intensely for the last since 2016. So that's already 8 years. So there's some. None of it is proprietary. But there's a lot of tacit knowledge that we have built up that we feel confident that. We talk about it openly, and there's nothing that we're trying to hide or patent or anything so ideas are in the air here and at ZHA and also at AADRL, where the course I mentioned, But like for Próspera, we did develop a very custom instantiation of that, like which is customized to the designs. And we also deployed it deployed it for sale, for use with these potential buyers for Próspera for the first time.
Have any of these modular buildings been realized anywhere else in the world?
No, those designs are kind of licensed for design instantiation on the island.
What about in general then, the idea of...
Yeah, in general, there is increasing interest in these kind of digitized, configurable houses, but none yet have. Most of the configurators treat it like a car configurator, so you can pick the trim or like bathroom sizes, colors, whatever. Like the choice is limited. So the big part of like our configurator ties in with alienable rights, for example, like, so, the idea of air rights like that New York has. So the way our configurator works is that you first pick some pixels, 3D pixels, which you want to buy. And then you buy both the air rights and the occupation rights. And if you buy the occupation rights, then you can choose if what kind of house will actually fit in those pixels that you bought. And so, which means that you can configure the 3D arrangement of houses, which is usually not the case. Usually configurators are restricted to interior layouts, not the exterior configuration of houses themselves.
Can you buy the pixels in front of you to preserve your view?
Yes, so that's where you buy the view air rights, like, which is actually one of the unique innovations in New York. The idea of you buy air rights so that you can buy air rights if the neighbor is willing to sell them, so that they cannot build higher. Yeah.
I've always thought that was the the fairest way to solve the problem of views.
Yes,
because everyone ranks a view completely differently.
Sure.
And you can't even debate it sometimes. You can't, because I value views. I really do.
Yeah.
I live in the countryside and I really value views. But I fully respect my neighbour who is a farmer who doesn't care less for a view and wants to put something there,
Yes.
And to put a price on it, the best way to do it is to put it in the free market, and then you see how much you value that view.
That's right.
I mean, there's literally a number on it. I would say, because when the number gets too high, it's like, okay, I don't value it that much.
Yes, exactly.
So that's interesting. So does Próspera have that already, or that system?
Yeah, they have the framework for implementing that system. But the configurator in principle has the potential to implement that feature. So far, because there are no actual individual buyers yet, or they were and they dropped off because of political reasons. But yeah, like the configurator does have that principle of buying air rights or view rights and then occupation rights. So you can just buy voxels and not put anything.
And how small are the pixels?
5 meter by 5 meter, 5 meter by 5 meter by 4 meter.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I really do think that is the best way to do it. Having thought it through, because it really does. Yeah, it's the fairest. I think it's the fairest way. Other than, I suppose, you could have somebody come in at this stage, very early stage, when arguably prices would be cheaper than in the future, and buy a house right there and buy all the land and space in front of them down to the sea, but that could stifle innovation then, couldn't it?
Actually it could, and that's where you need the other innovation or of retail buyers, right? Like the so-called fractionalized real estate. So because if you have a lot of these small pixels and you need to aggregate enough number of them to have any influence, and so that means that suddenly you need institutional investors. So Próspera also has that innovation possibility because they have fractional investment. So they work with this blockchain company that does guarantee fractional ownership of these pixels. So you need possibilities for a small number of people, retail investors to own some parts. Actually, like we also explored this idea, like at the scale of city districts and master plans, continue to explore that in the master's degree course at the DRL now, beyond residential community to like city districts and entire cities.
Do you happen to know how the city of New York enforces 3D rights?
Because
do they have a layout? Do they have a 3D layout?
Yes. I mean, traditionally it was enforced as like whatever's above your 2D layout. But now I think there's innovation in 3D PDF. So the cadastral maps, which register properties, also now legally encode like your air volume.
And it still goes straight up to the ionosphere or whatever. Well,
Yeah,
presumably at some point that's going to be something you'll need to take into account, won't it?
Yes, and it goes up, but there's also, I don't know the details, but I think like it also extends a little bit cantilevers, like it also depends on lighting. Most of it is also configured to allow light to penetrate into the bottom. I mean, London also has some of these. It's not called air rights, but it's called right of light or something.
Well, they also have the St. Paul's Cathedral rule and things like that, don't
they?
Which
yes, the view sheds, yes.
Yeah, so some 3D space in London is sacred.
Yes, but that's where I think the idea of air rights is important, because those are alienable rights and individually owned, or by because in London, yes, view sheds are important, but like they're enforced through these committees of the king or something, and then also the planning commission and so on. But in New York, it's just if I own the rights, and if somebody encroaches into them, I'll sue them, right?
I know it does does streamline the whole thing. Yes. That's what I like about Próspera's model is it streamlines so many things which stifle innovation.
Yes,
and gives you a very, I mean, it gives you a simple framework from within which to work.
Yes,
and then you know what you can and can't do from the start. And when you want to challenge something, you know the process.
Yes,
and and there's a cost. That's basically all you really need. That's right. I think really, when you look at the bureaucracy of a city like London, you realise just how much stifling is occurring because you can't put a cost on a lot of things. It's kind of like emotive and decided by a panel of people that often who have very ulterior motives as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And then, having said that, also, once cities begin to stabilize, and London's been around thousands of years, and so the complexities of London are very different to like new cities, right? That and I think so one size cannot fit all, but the principle of freedom definitely can help even existing well-established cities to change. And it might not be the same kind of extensive freedoms as in a new city, but yes, like alienable rights, I think is very much important. And one of the people I follow on Twitter, and a scholar, I think from he used to be part of the Adam Smith Institute, called Sam Bauman, he talks extensively about this kind of system of rights, and how it can promote innovation. But strangely enough, he also, when it comes to the actual architectural styles, he still prefers these traditional brick buildings and so on. So there is that somehow unnatural, I think, people who are very forward thinking in one dimension, they still hang on to somewhat traditional views on architecture.
In my case, because I'm what you would call a traditionalist, I suppose, in architecture. But I'm very open to anything.
Yeah.
What it is with me is literally my and I would call it innate, but it's probably not, my innate sense of beauty. And for example, take the English countryside. When I see a thatched cottage on a little windy cobbled street with trees and roses, and I feel good. And now that could be cultural programming, couldn't it? I mean, it's not a sort of pagoda in ancient, China, wherever, Asia. But still, I can also acknowledge the beauty in Asian architecture too. What I definitely can't acknowledge the beauty in is brutalism, for example. There's an obvious focus on ease of building. It seems that the way I see it, buildings, old, beautiful looking buildings to me have a more emotional content to them, and brutalism is something that's come straight out of the logical mind of a designer who's like, let's keep it as square and as precise as possible, because that makes me feel comfortable, because I don't like it when things get out of control, and when I don't have straight lines and straight walls, and and I'm very much down that end of the scale where I like, none of the walls in my house are straight. And it's annoying in one sense. I put up a row of hooks yesterday, and they were, I used a spirit level to get them up, and then I realised the ceiling's completely off, right? But I went with I should have lined them up with the ceiling because it looked better, but I didn't. I stuck with and I know that a lot of people can't sit with that kind of stuff. It makes them too anxious to see things that aren't precise,
Yeah, I mean, personal preferences aside, and there's definitely certain things that we can extract and continue from vernacular, right? Like vernacular wisdom. I mean, it is wisdom in the sense that like a lot of it has been accrued through trial and error, and like even material specificity, kind of timber and which tree and how long the tree should have been grown and so on. All of this has been accrued into cultures, building cultures over time. And so parametric design can, absorb that wisdom and extend it a whole lot. And doesn't mean that we just need to stick to like the existing shapes, like those wisdoms and those rules of construction and structure and environmental sensitivity like can be extrapolated and into new shapes, and which is I think where even brutalism could do it, right? Like you needed that jolt to the system, which was why brutalism refutes any kind of history and tradition, is because they want to just kickstart a new thing, and the effect of it has been tremendously visible across all cities in the world. But we believe we can do that same thing with parametricism, in the sense that like we can collectively kickstart a new generation. And unlike brutalism and unlike modernism, we can absorb a lot of the sensitivities and traditional wisdoms, which we are not opposed to. We're not fundamentally opposed to any of it, because we're very congenial with vernacular. It's very congenial with regional adaptations, very congenial with rule-based extensions, and because vernacular has a lot of wisdoms inherited, so we're not negating any of that. We are very congenial, and then that means that there's a lot more variety possible.
Somehow I don't think the modernists thought they were kickstarting, I think they were just like rejecting the past. I don't think and I don't think that it's quite antagonistic. I think it's quite, there's a really sociopathic element to being a modernist, because I've yet to see a modernist building that sits comfortably in a landscape. And especially if you go, I don't know. What's your view on modernism? Take for example, go to the extreme. I forget who designed it. You'll know it. There's a famous modernist building built above a waterfall, literally over the top of a waterfall.
Water, yeah.
Right. now I look at that and it almost makes me want to vomit. I'd love to see, I'm romantically, I'm looking at that thing thinking, it's going to look terrible in a few years, once all the moss starts growing up the side of it. And, plus it's just sociopathic. There's nothing in nature that exhibits those characteristics.
Sure. I mean, but I think, yes, we have varying views on like these kind of iconic houses, right? Like, but what, like everything else, they do motivate a certain innovation in the industry. like those kind of extreme floating slabs, and like that language promoted the development of concrete, and a lot of that benefit then percolated down into not those kind of buildings, but city blocks and higher density residential buildings, more compact, potential for building more compact and taller buildings and so on. I think so. With technology, as architects, we do, I think, have some kind of responsibility to explore possibilities with technology, so that, as I said, in the built environment, the real model for innovation is through designing these visible, publicly debated buildings, and they're publicly, for a large part, they're publicly funded in some sense, and so and modernism did percolate a lot of innovation into the everyday buildings. I mean, maybe Falling Water is not the right example because it's just a private house, but...
What about the Barbican then? You're close to the Barbican.
For example, Barbican, there was a lot of innovation in how urban living could actually happen, right? At high density living. To this day, it is one of the examples, both good and bad. One of the reasons that it's a bad example is because it was purely residential, right? And the very little mixed use there is already proved extremely beneficial for Barbican to survive during COVID, for example, right? That, and so, my opposition to Barbican is not really because it's brutal, but it's because there's a lot of innovations in the layout of plans and considering urban living and high density living with enough courtyards and so on. But there's not enough other kinds of use. There's no. So
I think I've quite a visceral response to buildings like the Barbican, and I don't know many people, given the choice between a quaint. Or even just go to West London, look at the little courtyard developments, and ask anyone, would you rather live, and arguably the price of a Barbican apartment might be the same as that now. I don't know. We're in the middle of London here, but say they were the same. Given the choice, I'm pretty sure people would choose en masse the quaint,
But that's not a black and white choice anymore, right? That because we do need cities and we need compact cities because in Tokyo, for example, I was astonished, even a small neighborhood, has a dentist, it has it can, the density of people provides for a lot of amortized resources. You can have very, craft shops, even small shops, can only thrive when there are enough buyers, right? Enough consumers. And so you need that density. So it's no longer a choice between, very sparse, low density, quaint housing versus high density living. I mean, of course, parts of the cities can still have that. And usually they have to be on the periphery. And that could be a mechanism by which cities can grow. You can have these valuable lower density housing for people with families and who need allotments or whatever, but not everybody needs that, right? Older people probably find it hard to maintain this, and plus they need access to NHS and all of these things, and they're also maybe socially isolated. So if they, there is a density density has its benefits. Like, of course, it has its negatives, like noise pollution and yeah, who wants to live in a matchbox? But that is the trade-off that we have to design for with cities, because like cities cost a lot of money, but to build and a lot of resource. So to make the highest and best use of our resources, our societal resources, we need to embrace compact, well-built cities. And Barbican might not be the greatest example, but some parts of innovation needed are in the Barbican. Yeah.
Talking back to Tokyo again, are even the high-rise in Tokyo recyclable every 30 years?
No. So once they reach very, very high, like then, there's so much concrete in them that they're not. But in the mid-rise buildings, like they start as like one story, they add another, and yeah.
But then at 30 years, they have to, regardless of the last one that was built, is it 30 years from the start?
Yeah, I don't know the specific regulation. It's maybe not every district, but yes, there is a general that they need to be renovated at least, and so they have to meet new, performance requirements, and so that means people don't invest so much in the current building, and that also boils down to their ownership model. Like not many people own, only the old people own. The houses, and then everybody young rents in all the shops and everything. So.
Moving on quickly, can you explain to me what you did with Liberland? Because I'm going to Liberland in 4 days' time.
Yeah.
To live there for a week.
Yeah, excellent.
To experience what's going on, and I saw the designs. Mm-hmm. Which I wasn't expecting at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really fascinating looking at that, because I didn't realise the grandiosity of the plan on Liberland. Can you tell me about those designs and what your part in it was? What do they serve? What purpose do they serve? Because I saw metaverse and this and that, and it was like, okay, I better find out from you.
Yeah. So Liberland, was an interesting, counterfoil to Próspera in some sense, that because they already have a massive community online, like they were using, these Telegram and like other forums to be Liberlanders, I guess. Like, and so Vit had this idea that he spoke with Patrick, and that this community needs a spatial identity, and that reflects the power of architecture. Like to identity building and architecture have been going hand in hand for centuries, right? So whilst they don't have the land, like we designed a futuristic beacon, so to speak, like that embodies their principles and belief in freedom, but also belief in technology and so on. And the purpose was to host it online or so-called metaverse, so people can envision like how the future could evolve into. So it's like a kind of lighthouse for people to move towards. Like, and so it had. So in the interim, like the idea was to use these spaces online. Like there was a community hall where Liberland could have its town hall, or they can have their debates and voting and so on. And then there was like a incubator for startup businesses in the Bitcoin space or the NFT space, and so crypto space. So there was a crypto building, there was an art building, all virtual, but meant to be used online by Liberlanders. So you log into a website, and rather than go to a 2D web page, you just navigate and see things. And so that's the power of architecture, right? That you can meet people and you can absorb a lot of information if it is designed well, and it also gives you an identity of what Liberland could be like in the future. Yeah.
And I mean, are there residential parts to it? Or?
Yes, there are, although we didn't design them in great detail. So we designed a larger master plan, which had plots, or lots of land that people could potentially purchase and put residential or put whatever, like a real city would grow, like just grow it online. But like we designed a central business district, so to speak, or central hub, like a Kickstarter hub, which had the town hall, it had the NFT building and the art gallery and so on. Which is also kind of relevant to real city building, right? Like you need to kickstart the real city with like some density of things. Typically, you cannot kickstart a city with residential buildings. You either need an office building, like like a Tesla city, or like you need a big employer who will employ these. And initially, maybe people drive in from nearby towns and live nearby towns. And so that's similar to that. Like we did like a certain critical mass of things you need to attract people to start using this online facilities, let's say. And so we had hosted a lot of, Daniela Gertavici, who was involved with Liberland for a long time, then brought Patrick, alerted Patrick and us to this idea that they're thinking of a metaverse, and then we designed that. And now, Daniela and Patrick are now taking this idea of a design metaverse, or a hub for designers, and we are now designing also the Metrotopia metaverse. Which looks at like social and cultural use of metaverse technology.
Sorry, what's that? Metrotopia?
Metrotopia, yeah.
What is that?
It's meant to be an online hub for designers to showcase and experiment with metaverse technologies.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had fashion shows, we had like a British company that was designing these electric vertical takeoff like taxis, eVTOLs. So they had their product launch online, and so many. Every week there's an event that you can sign up for. It's all typically free, and then you can experience the power of architecture virtually, and before. Then it also motivates people to think of architecture differently. So if you want to experience architecture without limitations of what's around you, like that relates to the Liberland effort also, like to think about the future of Liberland without hindrance of.
I just want to go back to something you said about the fact that it's not normal to start a new city with residential.
Yeah.
Might it be different now? Might that be a sign of the times? I'm just thinking about Próspera in general, and the kind of first movers on Próspera are probably digital nomads.
Yeah.
They don't need an office.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll need some services. Mm-hmm. They might need a place, but in all honesty, maybe we're entering this new age of residential, enticing people to go somewhere. I know the trap. I mean, we went to a pop-up city in in Montenegro, Zuzalo, right?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
And it was hosted at this kind of resort type place, and I felt that it was a classic example of how not to do it, because this thing was like a bit of a ghost town.
Right.
It was full of beautiful residential buildings in a really style that I quite liked.
Yeah.
But just nobody there.
Right.
And that's the problem you get with enticing residential, I suppose, is there's no reason to stay. And digital nomads are the first to come and the first to go as well.
Yeah, that's right. And yes, like I think they can be positive forces for positive change. They can bring interest to a region and so on. But like cities are more enduring than rapid changes in socioeconomics. I think that ideas of central place theory do persist. For like you do need like congenial industry to be together, even congenial people to be together, right? Like so, even if these digital nomads, you invite them, like they need to be rooted for some time of the year to make some positive change in that area. Like, so they need to employ people in from the local economy. They need to upskill them, like, and they need to have some purchase into, because like if you're very transient populations cannot build cities. I think like they cannot even kickstart, like, because you need congenial businesses to be next to each other. And so it needs an industry hub, like, so either it's a biotech industry or it's like a fintech industry or like a Tesla factory, or so there needs to be a big employer. Even like the South China explosion of semi-charter cities like Shanghai, Shenzhen, they all have some kind of industry hub. Like, Shanghai became financial and cultural, like Shenzhen is industrial manufacturing, and Guangzhou, and like there's big industries and so on. So these even mega city clusters, they need to have some specialization to kick off. Like, and so I think
isn't it also that they need some kind of incentive program? Normally tax, let's face it.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at Próspera, I suppose is the I would say it's at the cutting edge of the wedge with regards to new cities.
Mm-hmm.
And what they appear to be doing is trying to attract very contemporary businesses there, which they seem to be doing, and offering good tax benefits and a nice place to live. And I mean, is that the model for the 21st century? Like?
I think, yes, tax is useful, but I think like that. I consider myself like as even though I don't own a business or anything, like I'm entrepreneurially minded, because I'm intellectually attracted to people who have these trust, right? And so it's I think it's a density of people of certain intellectual caliber, like, and maybe tax is one way to attract that, but not the only. But we do need, like, people like Patrick, or like industry leaders like that see value in aggregating in a place, like, because that's going to bring others, like, who are intellectually interested and might not actually invest into the society per se, but even just coming and going, that there is a certain institution building that, again, as you use your word, like low time preference, right? Like, so we need, Silicon Valley classic example is not because there was any tax breaks, yes, to some extent, but it was like middle of nowhere. It just attracted like the Jet Propulsion Lab and like, or the Xerox companies, like there was some density building up over time. And that became, the engines for the next. So the cold start problem is a very, very real problem that not enough attention is paid to. Yes, tax is one part, but there's much more to overcoming the cold start problem than providing tax breaks, because you need to attract the right kind of, young in mind at least, like, but largely also young in body, but you also need people with capital. And so yeah, transient populations I don't think can start cities, and neither can it be centrally imposed. Like, I was watching this lecture by Alain Berthaud, classic. He wrote this book, Order Without Design. He believes that like cities are labor markets, and that's what drives everything. So he makes this example of Brasilia, like, where, like, Brazil said, like, they will move the seat of government to this place. And for the first few years, it actually worked because there was a captive audience of bureaucrats and so on. But it didn't catch on because there was only bureaucrats who were interested in. And bureaucrats are in some sense transient because they can move from one part of the country to another. And so you need like this kind of, whether it's centrally imposed or whatnot, like you need industry and economic incentive. I don't think it's tax per se. It's more like, how can I build a business How can I build something for the long term?
But it's an interesting dichotomy, I suppose, because in this particular moment in history, we've never had more freedom to work remotely. Yet, you're saying that we need to all sort of amass in one place in order for these things to work.
Yeah.
Those are two opposing forces, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think, work remotely is one. I mean, it is beneficial to, I think, in this transitory moment where everybody is getting used to I mean, if I think of myself and like a lot of my colleagues, like the reason we like flexible working is, I don't think because we don't want to commute, and the other, it gives us some flexibility to manage like other aspects of life, like medical appointments and so on. But that's only a transitory phase, right? Like, and over time, I think people would get, I mean, I'm already bored, like, to be at home even on the days I am at home, because we are communal, we are social, like, we just want to see other people, right? And yes, if I can overcome the commute problem, then I will be using the office more often. And then office is also changing, like the way we renovated our office, we took out most of the desk, and we can only host 60% of our employee base on any given day on desks. Others are spaces like these, like meeting areas, like, cafes and so on. And that's also changing. And so cities will accommodate to bring people back into, and this is not the first time it's happening, right? Like, in Chicago in the 1930s, like there was this trend that everybody was leaving Chicago, and then they came up with this new model of like city in a city, like, the famous building in Chicago with these car park, the Marina City, was designed like in this way to attract people back into the city. And they also came up with financial incentives and for people to buy apartments in the city. And so I think something like that is likely to happen, because you do definitely need people to aggregate and commit to societies and cities. And so in this sense, I was thinking about, there was this, in the height of the crypto craze, they released these coins called Miami coin and like, city coins. That's currently the only way you can own equity in a city is to buy property, right? Whereas if you have some other means of owning equity in a city, fractional, if you can buy stock of the city, like, I think more people will be invested, which is what, like, new cities are attractive for people is, if I put my effort to gentrify a piece of land, which nobody bothered about, like, and I should own some part of the future gains of it, right? And that...
in what sense, though? Do you mean as in the 3D rights? Would that be classed as, or is that property?
That's fractional ownership of property is one thing.
Yeah.
Because right now you can only own property in whole, and the whole property might cost at least £100,000, which not accessible to most people. And second, like, the only mortgageable property is like, is comes in a certain chunk of 30 meters squared, like, by regulation. You cannot buy anything less than 30 square meters on a mortgage in London.
That's true, actually. That would make cities much more competitive as well.
Sure.
If they had a fractional price on, if there was a stock in a city and it started going down and you started pulling your money out. Yeah. Then the government now has to go, shit, we need to up our game a bit. That's interesting.
Right. And I think, like, there is a trend for that happening already with the tech. I mean, it's kind of indirectly happening, right? That all cities are competing for immigrants. My family lives in Calgary. And I see like in the last 3 years, Canada, every year they had like 1 million immigrants, and a lot of them from India like ended up in the western coast, like in Calgary and Vancouver area, less because the East Coast is getting saturated, and the price is so high in Toronto and Ontario in general that people want to own something, and they start businesses like taxi businesses and so on in Western side. And so countries and cities are competing for immigrants because that's the only way that they can increase their tax base. And so it's an indirect way to own equity or compete for citizens. You can make that a lot more productive and like also cut through all of this kind of misuse of the immigration debate, I would say, on both sides.
But with a fractional ownership, it's a much more direct and obvious signal than.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So you
I wonder how you would implement that, though. I don't like the coin idea because it's too corrupt. It's like,
I know it is corruptible, but
corrupt. Well, yeah, but I say it's corrupt because I think inevitably it will always corrupt the person that creates the coin, unless it's a decentralized coin, which none of them are.
Sure.
Of course, that someone's going to get tempted to print a little bit more, especially if the price starts going down. I'm going to get a bit more,
but I think that's why, like communally, there have been the idea of land banks for a long time, which I don't subscribe to, but yeah, like equity in a city, one way or the other, has been the traditional signal for immigration anyway. Like, why do people immigrate to the US? Is in a way like, and where in the US do they go to? Is that's it's cities as a labor market, but it's also cities as which city is likely to grow. Like people, all immigrants choose that. It's a trade-off between employment today versus which city is likely to grow, which is what people always do. Like, even I think people now starting to look at Manchester more than London, like immigrants, because it's growing a lot. And so, people want to own equity of some sort in cities that grow, right?
Last question. With regards to the metaverse and IRL, how important do you think the metaverse is going to be? Obviously, there's a lot of people that think that, and we're already doing it with our phones and with our online presence. We're all sort of dipping in and out quite a lot now. What do you think in the future? Do you think there are going to be people spending the majority of their time in the metaverse?
I wouldn't say majority, or I don't know.
Not including sleeping, then.
Yeah. Yes. I wouldn't wish for us to spend the majority of our waking hours online, but I do think it is going to be increasingly a great instrument of experimentation, because particularly in the built environment, because built environment is a very risk-averse domain of society, rightfully so, because a lot of resources are invested and there's a lot of risk of even human life risk, if things are not designed well, and material misuse and so on. But online is a very fast-paced process of experimentation, which the built environment has been missing for the large part. And why do we, as Zaha Hadid architects, drawn to China? Not because of any other reason than they build so quickly and so fast that there is all the innovations happening there, right? And that's not only in the built environment. You can see that in the span of 20 years, China has become the foreground innovators in even digital technologies like hardware, even electric vehicles, and no longer it's in the US, right? So I think we need a platform for experimentation, and the metaverse provides a large part of what real cities provide. Real cities are economies where people, producers of goods and consumers of them are in close proximity. And that's what a metaverse could be. If you have enough number of users, like there will be a rapid innovation, like high street levels of innovation on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, which is why the internet evolved so quickly. And I think, we think that the metaverse could be an engine for experimentation, and we're working with like gaming companies, like Fortnite, for example. We creating a reimagined London kind of demo game where people can explore what if we put more residences in this area. What is the trade-off? Like, how can we transform one area of London just digitally to another use, like, and walk around in this. And we also hope that such online experiences is going to return civic pride into the built environment, which has been catastrophically eroded, in my opinion, over the last 30, 40 years. Then nobody really feels engaged with cities because they're banal to the extent. But if you're experiencing all of these things at human eye, which is what video games are, which is what metaverse is powered mostly by video game technology, it allows you to experience cities at human eye scale. So there's no hiding. You cannot not design all parts of the building like in online. Just because it's online doesn't mean that you don't have to design it. In fact, you have to design for all kinds of views, even aerial views, which you can get away with murder in the physical city, like, because planning only looks at certain views, nobody looks at how. But in a game, you can fly around, you can experience the city at various scales. So yeah, we think it's going to motivate a lot of innovation and return a lot of pride into. Plus, there are like 3 billion gamers. Like, the next generation is not going to not play games, right? Like, and increasingly, it's also going to be a mode of sales. Like, why is Ferrari interested in Fortnite? No gamer is going to buy a $1 million car. But even if there's one high-profile sale, it's going to create a culture, because most of even Lewis Hamilton and all these people play games, right? They might do other things in physical life, but they're also gamers. So
but they may also buy a Ferrari in the game.
Yes,
more to the point, I wouldn't be surprised if your market base goes from 10,000 people to 3 billion.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you sell a Ferrari for like $5 in a game?
No, definitely. Like,
because they can't sell small units. It's not possible for Ferrari to sell anything apart from a key ring to someone.
That's right. And so it's also a new way of brand building, right? Like direct to customer. Like, and I think Tesla, is a transitory example, I would say, like, moving from like this car dealership going directly selling to the customer. And that's going to happen increasingly. It could happen increasingly with every other aspect. Like, even with city building, like, you can directly, which is what Próspera is also trying to do with this configurator, is to eventually sell direct to the customer. Because right now, most other configurators are sold, for example, to developers. And then the developer sells to the customer. But like, we think, a lot of real estate is now sold on Instagram. It's sold on YouTube. And so there will be new influencers, new real estate agents online who are more digitally savvy. And, there's already been music concerts, like, with millions of people on Fortnite. And even with Metrotopia, we're already seeing, 20, 30, 50, 100 people at a time. It's beginning to be very rewarding as an experience, because you just log in and you meet somebody who's, who you might not have otherwise met at all. Like, I met people that I wouldn't have had access to in physical life because they're in New York or they're in a different circle of society.
Do you think residential real estate will ever exist in the metaverse in any substantial way?
Absolutely, because I think people want to hang out with their friends.
But I mean, like, for money, buying and selling of digital real estate. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can imagine it for a brand putting their logo. There's this real estate in Fortnite. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. What about actual real estate?
Yeah, you would definitely own residential real estate. You won't sleep but it will be a small scale. You will invite your friends, like you will have like parties and so on. You do need some space to do that.
Are we at a point then where the technology of VR or whatever is so good that it's like indistinguishable from this, maybe possibly?
Yeah, it's going to get there soon. It's not there yet. The internet is not uniformly spread, and access into these virtual spaces is not as seamless as yet. You don't need these VR headsets. You can just log into a website, but you still need to log in. And the hardware needed is not ubiquitously available yet, but in a very short time it's going to happen. And even AI technologies, as they rapidly evolve, they need a market to disrupt, right? And so they need to identify markets that have a high demand for AI application. And the metaverse is likely to be one. And spatial content creation, it might not look like residential buildings, but it will serve the purpose of residential use, meaning you reside there virtually, which is your domain, and you invite people into your house. It might not look like a square thing. It might have a very tall ceiling or whatever, or might not have a ceiling, but it still will serve the purpose of residential social use. And so you might watch a movie, and then you might be able to rent Netflix stuff online or whatever new thing. Play video games, which already happens. And people are watching NBA on their phones right now, as a social experience. I've seen NBA games with young people, or even football games. What's happening on the game is very tangential. Most of the experience is tweeting about it. There's a stream of tweets about what's going on. So nobody's listening to what the commentator is saying. You're just following the tweets. So it's going to be this multimodal experience, and the social experience is going to be fully facilitated by being spatial experience. Right now, online social experience is not spatial, and that is extremely restrictive. It's not appealing to a large number of people, because nobody wants to be only tweeting stuff, right? Or only on a website. But if you can be spatially engaged, that's going to be a game changer for sure.
Is that a good thing or not? I mean, that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, because when I think of what's happening there, take your example of all watching the game together. It seems like a great idea, but what it's doing is it's tapping into that lazy side of me that doesn't want to get up off my arse and go and hang out with my friends, basically. You know what I mean? And it's a real feeling. If because you notice that on a day-to-day basis. The internet is chipping away at a lot of things that you would have had to make the effort to do normally, which I think are good. And like you said,
sure.
Real-life transactions are well, I would say they're better than online interactions.
Yes and no. I mean, I think there's so little actual person-to-person interaction. I think the market this is going to serve is not going to erode away from people who are meeting or likely to meet in person anyway. If anything, it's going to promote more in-person meeting. So if you think about it, the reason people don't meet is, let's say this VR technology wasn't there, metaverse technology, people are not just jumping to meet each other. They're difficult in commuting. You have a family, you have kids, and but with this technology, at least you can be co-present in a virtual space rather than on a website. That is going to fundamentally change the interaction for sure. I think if you just imagine a slight extrapolation from the current metaverse technology, where it becomes less frictional to get onto this spatial environment, right? Right now, most of the friction is getting on. If you remove that, it does feel very natural to be conversing with somebody in a spatial way. My family lives in Calgary and I commute. So many times I would wish, when I'm talking to my son, he didn't have to hold his phone.
Is that what you mean about the the barrier to entry. It's that, or it's putting on the headset,
or
whatever.
whatever. Like,
so what does it become then? If you're not, how do you get rid of the phone or that? What are you talking about? Plugging in? I don't know.
No, like right now, like let's say there is like some way to transmit audio and transmit your location. That's all you're using the computer for, right? Like in the metaverse is actually an avatar. And when you speak, like if those audio is transmitted to that avatar, and if my emotions are transmitted to the avatar, like the input currently is your mouse or your headset, but it doesn't need to be. Like, I don't know what the technology is. Like increasingly, you could wear this on your glasses. And so when the hardware gets lighter and lighter, and the way to access the online world is going to free up your hands, it's going to fundamentally change the friction, or our it's going to overcome that uncanny valley of interfacing with another human, right? And I think if you think about it, like already calling on WhatsApp earlier, like I used to hate making phone calls because the audio was like not clear, and like, but now with the speakerphone and the audio is literally like I'm in that room, like we're speaking like this, like I don't feel any difference, like, and I feel that there's no latency, so I can just push a button and like talk to my son. Like that's a great way for technology, I think, to meld the physical with the virtual, and that I think I can. It can be very positive utopian future. It doesn't need to be dystopian. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good note to end on. I do struggle with the notion of the metaverse, because I'm in the old-fashioned part of me thinks it's a worse version of the real world, or it's a version of the real world where you don't have to put in the proof of work. You don't, like, this is why I don't like it when people say that, oh, my children play video games, but at least they play Minecraft and they're building something. And I'm thinking, that's such a horrible way to look at it, because if they weren't playing Minecraft, they'd actually be building something with their hands out in the garden, hopefully.
Sure.
But I like the way you frame it, that it'll just offer the opportunity to fill the gaps between our real life interactions with. I like that way of framing it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's also the economic attraction, right? That why is Nike and others in Roblox? They're not competing with their existing customer base. It's just that tapping into a new customer base, like, and offering new experiences that don't exist physically. And and I do think, like, imagine being able to converse as naturally and meet people randomly in another city in the world, like not go to New York for your interview.
I don't know how I feel about that, though, because like I record all these podcast interviews in real life at great expense and annoyance in many ways. Like I have to travel, because it's spatial,
right? Like it's your memory palace of that you can locate this conversation to this space.
Correct, but I also believe you get a better quality conversation.
Sure,
you do. Like I can tell instantly when I'm listening to a podcast. I listen to hours and hours of podcasts every week. It's like in the background there's always something going on, and there's something about the in real life podcast which is it definitely makes it a cut above the rest, and I think it's worth spending the money on. However, if the technology existed that I was, and I almost certainly will. Yeah, you're right, because you can extrapolate from this point. We will be able to experience this moment from anywhere with the same clarity.
Yes, it's about latency and friction, removing that, I also think that it's spatializing experiences is fundamental. That's why we are very much interested in the metaverse technology, because it's a spatial technology, and architects are definitely one of the professions, or one of the only professions, let's say, that deal with space and people at scale, right? Like thousands of people co-located simultaneous interactions is architecture and urbanism is the only other place where this happens, right? And therefore, I would say, the virtual is as real as the physical. So the distinction is not between in real life and in virtual life. It's like in physical life and in virtual life. And both can be very real. Like it can be, you can have real money transaction, you can have real conversations, you can have productive conversations online already. But if once that friction removes, then you can go to a class, and it doesn't need to be only virtual, right? You can have mixed reality where you have in person plus 30 other people, joining in from anywhere in the world. I listen to a lot of Twitter Spaces, So imagine that. If it was in a space
Well, during the pandemic I did that, when the first lockdowns happened and everyone was wondering what the hell to do with themselves, I bought a VR set and I did go. There were some Bitcoin meetups that happened in New York, in inverted commas, and it was a very strange experience, I must say, because I hadn't even used Zoom prior to that, let alone I put this headset on, and we all sat in an auditorium, and I was looking at the people next to me. I mean, it was very rudimentary, block people walking around, you had to choose a skin and all this kind of stuff, but I had the same social anxiety that I get in real life. It was bizarre. In fact, it probably was worse because I didn't really know how to navigate this thing. But, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe you should, we'll put you in touch with Daniela and you can experience Metropia. I think a large part of it's made a huge leap from Minecraft, like the fidelity of the experience, like the audio experience, the visual quality. It's nothing is blocky. Light is calculated in a physically realistic way, and you navigate more and more realistically. And the avatars have more detail now. Like it's not blocky people. It's like even have hair and lots of things getting more and more high fidelity to the point that you can extrapolate. You definitely need to have some extrapolation now, like a leap of faith, so to speak. But in the next 10 years, that it could all change very, very rapidly because,
Do you think that the Zaha Hadid business model could ever be funded by the metaverse more than the real world? Because if you think about it, the metaverse allows you to scale, right? That's basically it.
Exactly right.
And you're better selling 1 million buildings at £100 each than one building at £100 million each.
I think, yes, we are very much excited, and Patrick's spoken extensively about this. We are excited by two aspects of the metaverse. One is it promotes experimentation at a rapid scale, which will make our real life architecture or physical life architecture better. Because right now, the way we experiment in China, at the scale at which we experiment in China, the internet will just amplify that 100x. So we will only get better, right? The more we design, the more we develop our tools for scale deployment, the more we will be better. So that's one aspect. And then, yes, there is the economic aspect also, where we think our architecture is well suited for these kind of spatial experiences. It's not just because it looks futuristic. That's just a kind of symptom, but the underlying cause is that we care for the spatial user experience, and that people should have productive experiences when they visit our buildings. Even our physical buildings are attractive to the user because it provides engaging, productive experiences for them as individuals, as groups of people. A classic example is this small gallery for mathematics that we did in the Science Museum in London. Before we did our intervention, the dwell time was about 30 seconds. People would just pass by. And after we made our collaborative intervention with the curator, David Rooney, and the Science Museum client body, the dwell time is close to, a minute and a half. And just in the first year, there were 900,000 visitors to the small gallery of 1,000 square meters. And so this kind of social performance architecture, is what the internet needs. Why would anybody go to designer A versus designer B is if it drives footfall. because the internet is all about footfall, and our architecture is fundamentally designed around user experience. Therefore, it is attractive to users and the end user. So therefore, we believe that our architecture will be commissioned more online. So we are both congenial. We are experimenting with the technology more than most others. Our architectural ethos is aligned with the user experience. So for all these reasons, we think whenever the metaverse takes off,
well, it's already taken off, hasn't it? Really,
it will translate into more business and opportunity for experimentation for architects online.
One thought I want to leave you with would be: imagine, you've probably thought this already, but imagine the first time that a metaverse city, or let's scale it back, a metaverse village, you realize it's so well used that you create it in real life. I mean, that will happen at one point. It'll go back the other way, won't it?
That's right, yeah. And we often talk about this, right, that from the metropolis to the metaverse and back, right? The current metaverse, like, there is a lot of, quite a lot of people criticize, like, Liberland and, not the majority, but like a few cranky people. It's like, oh, it's like the metaverse. Why does it look like, something that could be possible in physical life? Well, because there is a reason, like, creating things online takes effort. Like, it's not just because, material is not involved, the effort is involved. And we want it to be a space of productive experimentation that eventually could somehow make its way back into physical life, or at least influence physical architecture, right? Like, and so if we are making these floating things, like, it doesn't have a productive experience beyond just fantasy, right? Like, and you wouldn't be able to sell stuff, like, you wouldn't be able to have it's not designed for online education, it's not designed for online music concert, not designed for anything online, it's not designed for the user experience. It's just, so that's one reason why we think a lot of the metaverse experiences as a starting point will benefit a lot if it took impetus, if it took examples from physical cities, inspiration from physical cities, and also the learned wisdom of physical cities, and replicated some of it online, and then innovated from there. Eventually we'll make it back to the city, right? Because we always say that cities was the original internet. You go to a city to browse, to shop, and to meet people. Exactly all the things you do use the internet for.
Wow, fascinating. And Liberland might be the first place that happens. You never know.
Yeah.
It could easily be that. Anyway, Shajay, thanks. Phenomenal conversation. Really have helped me understand a couple of things, and you've opened my eyes to the potential. I'm a bit of a bug. I have a bit of a bugbear about the metaverse, but maybe you're right. Maybe it's an addition to what we already have that actually doesn't eat much into in real life time. We'll have to see. In my house, it's not allowed. So. But anyway, thanks for talking. It was a really great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, and it's great talking to you too. Yeah.
Thank you.